I would like to introduce the two editors who have joined us. Mr. Tony Joseph couldn't join us. He's in Singapore, in Australia. G. N. Devi. Ganesh N. Devi is a thinker, cultural activist, and an institution builder, best known for People's Linguistic Survey of India and Adivasi Academy created by him. He writes in three languages, Marathi, Gujarati, and English. His first book in English after Amnesia, published in 1992, was received to a huge critical acclaim. Mr. Devi was educated at Shivaji University, Kolhapur, and the University of Leeds, UK. In 1996, he gave up his academic career in order to initiate work with denotified and nomadic tribes and Adivasis. Devi initiated the largest ever survey of languages in history, carried out with the help of nearly 3,000 volunteers and published in 50 multilingual volumes. In response to the growing intolerance and murders of several intellectuals in India, he launched a southward movement of artists, writers, and intellectuals. In order to lead this movement and to initiate his work on mapping the world's linguistic diversity, he moved to Dharwad in 2016. Today, he has traveled further south to be with us in Chennai. Professor Ravi Korisakar. Professor Ravi Korisakar is a senior academic fellow of the Indian Council of Historical Research. He is a key contributor to Indian early archaeology, specializing in geoarchaeological methods and approaches to understanding the relationship between prehistoric humans and their environments. He has published 7 books in India and 2 abroad, and is a section editor for Current Science, India's leading science fortnightly. Ravi has also held positions as honorary director of Robert Bruce Forte Archaeological Museum in Karnataka since its establishment in 2010. And I am also happy to have Mr. N. Ram as a moderator for this session. Mr. N. Ram is the director of THG Publishing Private Limited. He was the editor-in-chief of the Hindu Group of Publications. After his MA in History from Madras University, he did his MS in Comparative Journalism from the Graduate School of Journalism, Columbia University. His area of special journalistic interest include Indian politics, aspects of India's foreign policy and nuclear policy, the external pressures on India's economic and political sovereignty, issues of corruption and abuse of power, the challenge of communalism and fundamentalism in India, the Sri Lankan ethnic crisis and India's interaction with the freedom of expression issues, and the role of media in society. Mr. Ram is author of 2 books, Why Scams Are Here to Stay and Riding the Nuclear Tiger. Along with Susan Ram, he wrote the biography of R.K. Narayanan, The Early Years. He is a founding trustee of the Media Development Foundation that runs the Asian College of Journalism, Chennai. May I request the dignitaries to come to speak? May I request my colleague Sundar to hand over mementos to the speakers. Okay.
Good evening. This is a very interesting work, as Paneer Salam has just indicated. They have not done anything like this. It's a work of many hands, but it has a clear connecting theme or idea, which we are going to try to draw out in the course of this conversation. It's not easy for me to take you in any connected way through this conversation, because for the reasons that will become clear. There are 3 editors of this book. They've done the bulk of the work in commissioning and putting it together. It was quite a major exercise, teamwork, because there was an advisory group. There was reaching out to scholars, first selecting them, getting a positive response, and organizing it in under themes or sub themes. So it's quite a feat of editing, commissioning and editing. And it didn't take that long either, 2 years.
Yeah, it began in about 2018-19.
Yeah.
By 22 we had finished. So three and a half years.
Okay. And I'm quoting from the introduction that to give you an idea of what this is about. The title is The Indians' Histories of a Civilization. Panir has already called attention to the significance of the plural. It doesn't claim to be one history, it's open-ended. It says many-ended openness of history as a field of inquiry. And Professor Devi points out that the genesis of this book lies in the contestation unfolding before us in recent years between the scientific approach to history and, you know what, the ideologically charged attempt to distort the history of South Asia. And he sets out the context. He substantiates that statement, what this ideologically charged attempt to distort history is, who's behind it. But basically, it's very open. There's no secret about it. He quotes the minister, culture minister, Mr. Sharma, as saying that it's a Hindu first version of Indian history will be added to the school curriculum, etc. Or a Hindu supremacist, you could say, view of history. And this is a response to that contestation. And Professor Devi points out that the two branches of science, or the two scientific disciplines that the RSS and those associated with that school of thought, ideologically charged thought, the disciplines they draw on are genetics and archaeology. We have a distinguished an archaeologist, and we have somebody who's worked not in genetics but on languages and for a broad sweep of things. The other editor, Tony Joseph, it would be good to have him, but I think one of our two editors will represent him, because I don't know which one. I'm going to make it open because some of it is very interesting. You may be familiar with the work and the idea of the first Indians. But who are Indians? My first question to Professor Devi goes back to an old statement, perhaps a notorious statement, by Winston Churchill, made in 1931, and I quote. It's a speech given by Churchill who was a notorious imperialist, totally opposed to India's freedom. It was a speech given at the Constitution Club in London in 1931, in March 1931. And the quote is, "It is the commonest fallacy of present discussions to speak of India as if it were the home of a strongly coherent united race. It makes me sick when I hear the Secretary of State saying of India, she will do this and she will do that. as though it's one person or one unit. India is an abstraction represented by a handful of politically minded classes who have no means of intercourse with each other except in the English language, who have no real contact with the masses, who are incapable of giving them the guidance they require, and are animated in the main by very great hostility to this country. Forget that. India is no more a political personality than Europe. India is a geographical term. It is no more a united nation than the equator. This used to be quoted when I was at college. It's a notorious statement, but people have forgotten it. So, how do you challenge that? That there is nothing really called India. There are no nations. It's so diverse. Nothing can hold it together. It's just a geographical expression we know on the map. And how does this? It doesn't directly respond to it, but how do your histories connect?
Well, 1931. Thank you. 1931, of course, has a context, and that is where serious talks about giving some kind of autonomy to Indians to run the place, run the government, was beginning. The roundtable conferences were coming, and Churchill belonged to the conservative side of the British politics. We all know that. But just a few years before this statement was made by Churchill, two divergent statements were made by Indians about India. Just a few years before. 5 years before 1931, 1926, the Motilal Nehru got a resolution passed in the Congress, annual Congress meeting, saying that when India becomes independent, it will become a multilingual country. And the spirit of that resolution got reflected subsequently when the Constituent Assembly met, and it agreed after a long discussion on giving this eighth schedule of the Constitution without mentioning any single language as the national language. 14 languages included in the eighth schedule became languages of importance, administration. It's another thing that later on Hindi was added as a language of administration and not as national language. But in India, an idea of India had emerged through a people's struggle 5 years before this. Just a couple of years before that, the RSS was founded, and the RSS had a philosophy backing it, which did not come from the RSS organization in 1926, but it came from the Hindu Mahasabha, based on a text by Savarkar, which was Essentials of Hindutva. And in that, India was shown in terms of essentials. This most central essential was those who were born here, they belong to this place, but they must have their religion also born here. It has to be their Pitru Bhumi. Pitru Bhumi was the term used in Germany. We were using Matrubhumi. It was Hindumata, but he made it into Pitru Bhumi, fatherland, reminding us of a contemporary philosophy which was emerging in Germany at that time. And he said it has also to be your Punya Bhumi. And then so India of his imagination was a place which was united through religion and successors of that religion dwelling in this territory. That was one idea of India. The other India was India made of many languages, many religions, many ethnicities. Both these visions have conflicted in the Indian past over the ever since our independence. Unfortunately, the second vision of India is has acquired a dominant place today, and therefore it is necessary to remind the people that we have histories. There's one more thing. Churchill speaks of territory, a European scale of territory, and he is right in that. There's not a word of what he said is wrong, but he should have added, but since he has not, I will add it. Uh, in India, our timelines for transition from one era to another are not horizontal, they are not straight lines, they are wavy lines. For instance, if Tamil Nadu moves to modernity in the 19th century, Bihar may move to modernity in the 23rd century. If something happens here, say the rise of the emergence of sects as a challenge to orthodoxy, religious orthodoxy, happens in this part of the country in the 8th and 9th century. It happens in Karnataka in the 11th century. Basveshwar would be 11th, 12th century. It happens in Maharashtra with Eknath, Tukaram in the 14th and 15th century. It happens in Gujarat with Narsi Mehta in the 15th or 16th century. The timelines are wavy, and therefore we do not have, just as we say there was a French Revolution and France, all France gets into the revolution mode. In India, we don't move with our feet step in step going ahead, and that's the beauty of India. We live in many times, and many of us live in a single time. Churchill was a great leader during the wartime, but his own people said that he was not such a great leader in peace, and therefore his statement challenging us on the idea of India has a certain grain of truth in it, but there is more to it. And the more to it is that India is an idea of diversity. Diversity is India. That idea also at the heart of got into our constitution when the constitution defined us technically. India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. So
For him, it was it was a matter of scorn. He was highly negative toward it, but you celebrate diversity. Why?
uh, and diversity has been with us from the very beginning. I mean, I will now play the role of Tony Joseph.
Yeah.
People arrived here. And
Chapter is the migrations that shaped
yes.
Indian democracy.
Yes, and Partha Majumdar has contributed, and Tony, I mean, your nephew, sir, and Tony Joseph. Migrations from about 65,000 years ago, these migrations started. Several waves came. People settled here. Clans were formed. Population knots, KNOTS, as anthropologists would say, and subsequently they merged with others. People came from all directions. I mean, there was the first major migration from out of Africa. There is also subsequent migration coming from these Eurasian steppes. There's a migration prior to that coming from Iran, which brought agriculture, and several migrations. And subsequently also the Greeks came here, Europeans came here, the Mughals came here. India is a mix of population. And the beauty of that mix is everybody in India knows that admixture of population is what enhances the human quality among people. We become, despite the violence that we have noticed in the past, we became tolerant, and we held tolerance at the heart of a philosophical vision of the. I mean, India alone could create a Gandhi, for instance, or or a Buddha. or a Tukaram or a Mira or a Kabir. Tolerance comes from this mixture. And so it has been so in the past also. Diversity has been at the core of our being, who we are, who we are. Of course, today this great rise of violence, but that comes out of a philosophy of India's in terms of essentials of Hindutva, Hinduism as India. And in the 20th century, two countries which built their countries on the basis of a single language, single ethnicity, in the 19th century, Italy and Germany, turned up in the 20th century as fascist countries. So we are the antithesis of fascism, traditionally.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
imagine little more. Go back in time. Um, the diversity manifests itself very clearly with the transition taking place from hunting gathering to agricultural way of life. Although we look at India as one geographic,
can you hear?
yes,
Okay.
one geographical unit, there's a lot of diversity, environmental, geographical diversity within the subcontinent. And when the transitions, like he was saying, medieval period begins at different times in different parts of India. Agricultural way of life also began at different points of time in different geographical environments across the subcontinent. We see that transition taking place as early as 10,000 years ago in Balochistan, west of the Indus Valley, in the Bolan region, and so on. Whereas in southern India, this transition is much later, by about 3000 BC. If we can stretch it more liberally, it goes back to 3500 BC and so on. So the transition in different regions, when you come further south into Tamil Nadu, we see that is even much later and so on. But by about 2500 BC, we see that major part of the subcontinent was inhabited by simple agricultural societies, and they were adapting to regional resource base. For example, if you look at Ganga Valley and further eastwards, we see rice cultivation dominating their agricultural economy. Go westwards into Greater Indus Valley towards Balochistan, we see cereals like barley and wheat being very, very staple food crops. Come down to South Gujarat, further south into the peninsula, we see millet agriculture playing a very important role. But these were controlled by not only the availability of local resources, plant food resources, but also adopting these crops for cultivation which are suitable for that particular climatic environment prevailing in those areas and so on. But then integration begins to take place after 2500 BC, and then we have such a broad spectrum of food crops today. And we go back in time, you can identify regionalism in the way in which different types of food crops were consumed. And then prior to the emergence of historical period, these were simple man-land relationship which governed diversity across the Indian subcontinent.
The correlation between agricultural developments and migrations.
Yeah.
Well, can you explain that?
Actually, what we see is the crops from Southeast Asia, we call Austroasiatic, suite of crops, then West Asian crops, Central Asian crops, and also from eastern part of Asia, that is China and so on. So, although we have multiple varieties of millets, many of them also came from outside. So that phenomenon has been taking place because along with the expansion of populations, language families were also migrating into, there was movement between these two regions from Eastern India to Southeastern Asia, from Southeastern Asia into, so like we have four major language families in India. They are the result of these movements which are taking place since the emergence of agricultural way of life.
One friend asked me, when I said well, agriculture developed in Iran and then it came here. So that friend was very angry. He said, "Do you think our ancestors were stupid? They did not. They could not invent agriculture locally." I said, "This is. You don't have to feel sad about it. You should feel happy because there was for the hunter gatherers food sufficiency was
Yes.
there, and therefore there was no need for
Need for
agriculture.
shift.
Iran developed it because they were insufficient in food during the hunting gathering time. Otherwise, tools were the same. Tools they were using and we're using more or less the same. So we should feel happy that we had to develop agriculture later than Iran rather than earlier than Iran.
Although late, they were indigenous. They were
Yes.
independent of any influence from outside.
Yes.
At some point of time, where the origins were taking place.
Tony Joseph ends his book with the famous statement that we are all migrants.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. There's
Could
no
you
doubt about it.
explain
Out of
to people
Africa,
who haven't
I mean,
read about
that's why, although this book deals with last 12,000 years more intensively, I've stretched it backwards to about 200,000 years ago because climate played a very important role in controlling movements, hunter-gatherer movements across the globe. And all our ancestors came from Africa. That is no question about, nobody doubts about this particular fact that our ancestors moved out of Africa at some point of time. There is a debate going on whether they moved out of Africa 120,000 years ago or 60,000 years ago or even 200,000 years ago and so on. Despite that, I make one simple conclusion here in my chapter that at least at 60,000 years ago, our ancestors who came out of Africa were well established in different parts of the Indian subcontinent.
So we are all out of Africa.
Definitely, no question. Because DNA studies have established that we share genes not only with the African stock, but with the extinct ones like Neanderthals as well as Denisovans. We share their genes even today.
Well, David Rick, our Hyderabad CC
CCMB.
had samples, gene samples for about 10,000 or more. And David Rick from Boston and Thangarajan in Hyderabad and Lalji Singh. They worked on this to figure out how to make sense of those samples. They came up with the observation that the first migration from Africa, people settled more in the south in the and later in the later views there were settlements in the north as well. Of course, some had gone to the north, particularly the Shivalik regions and so on. So these people in the south should take pride in being the first Indians.
In fact, there are two major
55,000
migrations.
years ago, and I remember the Hindu carried a very long review of David Rick's book, Who We Are and How We Came Here, on two Sundays, running Sundays. Very long review of that. A very pivotal book.
The earliest migrants out of Africa are called archaic hominins. We identify with what is called Homo erectus. And, near in Chennai itself, there are several sites, including Pallavaram and Athirampakkam. We have established, the researchers working at these two sites have established that as early as 15 lakh years ago, our ancestors were here. They are called archaic hominids. And then around 60 to 80,000 years time period, these archaic humans were gradually replaced by modern humans. We call them Homo sapiens and so on. So out of Africa 1 and out of Africa 2, Indian subcontinent was a place which was really attracting these migrants out of Africa at different points of time. So earliest evidence of humans as we identify humans on the basis of material cultural evidence left behind by these early ancestors in the form of an archaeological record. So an African record is very, very old, going back to 3.3 million years, or now they say even 3.6 million years and so on. But the one who left Africa that is very well documented in the archaeological context is Homo erectus around 2 million years ago, 20 lakh years ago. So they moved northwards into Europe, southern Europe, and then eastwards into Asia and so on. And by about 1 million years ago, even Southeast Asia was colonized by these migrant early hominins. So they were well established in different parts of old world, what we call Africa, Europe, and Asia. Because the Americas and Australias were not colonized by these early hominins. Only modern humans, our immediate ancestors, were the ones who crossed across large water bodies and raft across and navigate and so on and reach Australia by about 65,000 years ago or so. So there is this issue out of Africa. India happens to be at the crossroads between Australia and Africa. So the debate is such that either it was the first stop when humans migrated out of Africa was India or somewhere else. So, but
There
we
were two major migrations.
yes, first major migration was by Homo erectus. Homo erectus itself is around 2.5, 2.3 million years in Africa. But the first migrants, Homo erectus settlements that we see outside Africa, they are about 1.8 million years, 2 million years or so. So that has given us, that chronology has given us this particular model of arguing for migrations taking place at different points of time in the past. So the first major expansion took place around 15 lakh years ago, as evidence from site called Athirumpakkam in Tamil Nadu. Another site in Karnataka called Isampur. They have been dated between 1.2 to 1.6, 1.5 million years time period. Maybe there are many more sites. We are yet to look at them. We have not come across those sites. And
one of the things we learned from the book is that genetic material is scarce in India, hominids.
it has
Sri Lanka has better. So your discipline comes to the fore.
Yeah, we have proxy records because DNA is not well preserved in very wet climatic conditions. But actually, the evidence from Sri Lanka counters this statement. Now they have developed methods which, even from the soil where the skeleton was buried, one can extract DNA. But then, older the specimen, lesser are the chances of extracting DNA. So, 500, 600,000 years old, human skeletal material is not likely to preserve. And moreover, major part of the subcontinent, peninsular India, was well watered in those days as we go back in time. And this very swampy environments. So for fossilization, you require desiccating environments. And it appears that the subcontinent inland regions were not as dry as we see them today. So that is one reason where tropical conditions were not facilitating preservation of bone material as well as the DNA material in that. But the techniques of extracting DNA are improving and they're becoming more and more um, useful for resolving some of the issues.
So these two disciplines offset each other very nicely.
Indeed,
Genetics and
yeah,
archaeology.
yeah. And
Sri
Lankan evidence is not older than about 50,000 years. It's very recent past. That is why we are arguing that in the Indian subcontinent, peninsular South India, we must be having sites which are yet to be discovered, which are older than 50,000 years. So, what we have thought is tropical forests were uninhabitable for hunter gatherers. But Homo sapiens seems to have overcome this constraint. So, since the time of Robert Brucewood, who was the first person to discover Paleolithic sites in South India, he said that these are isolated during those time periods. But now because Sri Lanka is a clue to us that even tropical forest age environments were also inhabited by these hunter gatherers who were moving into the subcontinent and beyond around 80 to 90,000 years ago or so. But we need a context which can be established with the help of radiochronology and as well as the faunal material, human skeletal material.
Now, another question. Does evolution theory explain why archaic hominins lost out? Because they didn't necessarily, they had even larger brains in some cases.
No, it's not true.
No?
Brain has been increasing since the time of Homo habilis. So from 300 to 400 cc average brain size to now we have 1600 to 1800. There are some anomalous, skulls which indicate that even larger, human ancestors had larger brain size and so on. But then there is a gradation one, which has been very well established by morphological study of cranial capacities of various fossils, whether it is Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and also Homo sapiens. So there is evolution, and associated with these anatomical changes taking place was the encephalization. The meat eating played a very important role. Animal protein was, increasing the tempo of change, and cranial capacity was on the increase. So man became more intelligent. So Homo sapiens. Sapien means intelligent man.
What made you take up such a long time scale?
It's
Going back to, let's 200,000 years. or as we said, even millions of people.
It is-
But let's take 200,000 years as a starting point. That's the second paper in the book.
I was
by
thinking, yeah,
Professor Ravi Korisetta.
I was thinking, if somebody asked a question, a school child, what has been our past? Then, in the present circumstances, three answers come. One, by people who say they are studying history. The other comes by people who say they study proto-history. And the third comes from people who say they study prehistory. But history is about the past. Proto-history is also about the past before the historical past. And prehistory is prior to the history and proto-history. In the case of India, those gray zones.
What's proto-history?
Gray
Say time period wherein we have a culture or a civilization who had a written language but has not been deciphered by archaeologists. So that time period is called proto, means they are on the threshold of entering historical.
That is, we may have archaeological evidence, but literary evidence is not there. I mean, we do not have complete, we have evidence, but evidence to verify evidence is in short supply. That is kind of slightly gray area, hazy area. So I thought, if we have to answer that child, what is our past? It's good to tell the entire story rather than making these separate compartments of first class, second class, third class as well train. Tell the entire story, and therefore we thought we should prepare such a book. But there is a second answer to your question, and that answer is that the government of India was trying to set a committee, and the brief given to that committee was to review the Indian past for the last 12,000 years. That is beginning, I mean, from since Holocene till now. So we thought that if the government wants to review the history for the last 12,000 years, it's good to review the history from the perspective of diversity for the entire period and a little more. And that's how a person well studied in genetics, in archaeology, and in my case, somebody dabbling with language decided to come together.
In fact, numerous claims have been there for having deciphered the Indus Valley script, but there is no unanimity, and it is yet to be deciphered.
Not deciphered.
Not yet deciphered. And that is that
In
period.
fact, Roja, their library, research library, has a
Irava-
center
project.
of
Yeah.
study,
Yeah.
largely based on the papers gifted by Aramata Mahadevan,
Okay. Yeah.
supplemented by gift ceremonies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Work.
So that Indus Valley civilization we call proto-historic civilization. So that part
Proto-historic.
only proto-historic, because once there is unanimity about the decipherment, it's not as yet possible, because the major constraint is we have not come across a bilingual, a inscription of that particular context, and also we don't have a long sentence written in that particular script which is used by the Indus Valley people. So these two things have hindered scientific decipherment of the Indus script.
Although most scholars agree that it is a script belonging to the Proto-Dravidian linguistic family.
There are hundreds of people
Who
that
disagree.
hundreds of perspectives and so on.
There is even a challenge to the assertion that it is a script representing a language by Steve Farmer and even Michael Witzel, I think, professor of Sanskrit, contributed.
The function of those seals, whether they are marks made for trading purpose
Yeah.
or whether they are some scriptures for remembering things, very difficult to say. Nothing can be said. I mean, in other areas, the Assyrian writing is clearly known as writing, but here it is, and it is that lack of clarity is what makes historians term that particular period and the period following, so a few hundred years, about 500 years. The Vedas dating, Rigveda is 1400 before Christ.
Post.
So before Rigveda and since the decline of the Indus civilization, that period is still to be fully covered. Therefore, proto-history.
So we have a lot of graffiti on the pottery belonging to Iron Age in South India. Dr. Ravada Madhavan Mahadevan also has dealt with that particular issue to identify what they signify in terms of whether it is potter's mark or in terms of trader's mark or anything like that. So they are random symbols. There's not a consistently, put on the surface of a pottery or anything. Same is the case with the Harappan script. They are all very short inscriptions associated with some icons and so on. But so very difficult to make meaning out of them as long as we don't have a bilingual like Rosetta Stone or like cuneiform script was decided.
So you've given up hope that it will be.
No, there's no question of giving up hope, but people are pursuing it from different angles. But one day we may. There are lots of even IT professionals engaging themselves in trying to resolve this particular issue and so on. But that particular what sense it makes is difficult to say as yet.
The link between the I must mention here that I was able some couple years ago to visit Harappa. It was quite thrilling.
Yeah, even I went.
Yes.
I also went. Both Mohenjo-daro or Harappa.
I've not been to Mohenjo-daro, but it is quite thrilling. I think that's captured in the book that
Yeah.
people are astonished when they find
Yes.
such an advanced.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and the advancement is, astounding. It causes astonishment, but the decline also is a great curiosity. And with different theories about climate, for a very long time, it was held that they were attacked.
Rivers change
Yes,
course.
also rivers change course,
Aryan migration.
and so we have a lot more to know about that. And if that comes to our knowledge, that we get to know, then the way we look at our heritage will change dramatically. Because at the moment, the Vedas appear to be at the center of what we have been Vedas and Upanishads. But once we know enough about the Indus Valley and its symbolic system, it's the way it dealt with signification, with metaphysics. So there's something known about the social order. Exclusion is known on the basis of medical, the examination of teeth and all that in archaeology. But once we know the metaphysics of the Indus people with greater clarity, our view of our Indianness is also going to change. And that will upset the way we look at the map of India. As if the north is more important, the rest is less important. All we are in for a big shake-up, big turmoil. Once we know that,
What is the definition of a civilization? When does a settlement, a formation attain this stage of what
We
you
have
can call a civilization?
two concepts in archaeology. One is culture and civilization. So simple societies, when we deal with simple societies, hunter-gatherers, early agricultural societies, we use the term culture. But when we come across political economies like the Indus Valley civilization, contemporary Nile Valley, Mesopotamian, and so on, where we have organized polity, we call them, complex societies. So that, and then civility is another aspect to define what is a civilization in that particular context. So we have the monument that V. Gordon Child has identified some 18 to 19 criteria. So we look at these monumentalization of the landscape, long distance trade, internal trade, and also procurement of raw material resources from different sources, far off places, and so on. So well organized procurement, processing, distribution system also entails the existence of a political structure. So hierarchical structure. So we call them complex societies. Many of them have a written language which has been deciphered, unlike the Indus Valley. So they are actually historical, early historical. In our case, Indus Valley, this is proto-historic. The moment we decipher and read meaningfully,
You'll certify.
it will be beginning of early historic period. But our historical period begins with the earliest Brahmi records that we have in India. So
Now, coming to Brahmi, it's a hot topic here, in partly because of the work of Vairavata Mahadevan,
Yes.
but there are others like Balakrishna.
yeah,
The book was launched. The link between the Indus, the Harappan script, now they call it the Harappan script,
Indus script, Harappan script.
it's more than the Indus Valley.
Yeah. I mean, it's 1 million square kilometer areas.
So, and Brahmi, it's a bit speculative, isn't it? The connections,
The claim
the assertion that they are linked.
the claim is made on the basis of a lot of hard work or long years. But the claim does not have sufficiently complete evidence. That is because there are missing pieces there. And if there are more tablets, then perhaps the entire picture would be clearer. And therefore, we at the moment going ahead with, when I say we, not in the case of this book, generally, people are going ahead with the assumption that it is a script. But whether it is a
Which that is
whether it is a script or these are signages, marks related to exchange and trade and commodity classification and so on. There is a debate possible.
What's your inclination, your guess?
Brahmi as such is
No, not Brahmi.
Indus script. Indus script actually got restricted to a specific geographical area. If you divine, most of the maps they define the area covered by the Indus Valley civilization. The script did not go beyond that particular boundary, eastern boundary or western boundary or anything. So if there was any kind of interaction between the Indus province and the rest of the Indian subcontinent, would have been in a position to say there is a continuity. But what we see is while the Indus Valley civilization was flourishing in that defined geographical area, rest of the subcontinent was occupied, inhabited by hunter-gatherers as well as early agro-pastoral communities. So that gap between southern part of India and the northwestern part of the subcontinent is very huge. And it cannot. I have been struggling to find evidence, material cultural evidence, which can link this region with that region. And then earlier there were theories that Karnataka is rich in gold resources like 30 gold mines, Kolar mines. So early workers they said no, gold went from southern India to Indus Valley. But what came from there? You gave such a precious material to the Indus people, but what did they give you in turn? We don't see any evidence. But later we know the gold resources were from elsewhere and so on. So it's very difficult. Of course, one can have this perspective and then look for evidence. As long as the evidence is not there, it remains this sort of an
Now,
hypothesis.
this gold script, and the third thing which is of great debate is the horse.
Yeah.
Oh, there's clear evidence the horse was not present in the Indus Valley.
Domesticated horse. Horse was there.
No horse.
Wild horse was there. Not the domesticated, what we call
Horse
I don't think there's any representation.
No, not at all. Even in the
Rajaram Jha
uh,
fabricated it through computer
that
enhancement.
equus horse is
Plus
related to
Canalis it
the
is called. That is not found. There are equidae.
That is a bull.
No. Bull is horse. Equidae remains are there, but they are not horse. There are multiple varieties of that family, So domesticated horse has not been. Nobody has, even if we ask a person who studies animal remains from these Harappan context, they are very cautious. Have you found any evidence for horse? No, we are looking. There is equidae, but not horse.
I must say to our friends present here that you will laugh if I tell you that the whole question of language in India hinges on the question of horse.
Why?
Moment.
Whether it came from Eurasian steppes here
Stepping.
or steppes here or not, or whether it went out. When the language went out, there is a claim, rather spurious claim, that Sanskrit went from here to other places,
Out of Asia.
and the received wisdom, settled wisdom, is that it came from outside. It came from outside after the development of horse.
The Semitic influence.
No, yes, horse as the energy to draw a cart, wheeled cart, on which one could stand and shoot an arrow. I think that gave a tremendous military advantage, strategic advantage to the people in the Eurasian states. And then from there to Iran, one journey, and also from there to Punjab, northwest India was another journey, and that the ancestral language of Sanskrit came from there. Uh, Sintasta and Mitanni people, they brought it here. But the present, there is a group in India which is trying to build the idea that the language went from here to the rest of the world.
One final question on the Brahmi script, and in particular the Tamil Brahmi script. The Airavata Mahadevan basic thesis is it came from the early Mauryan period, either at the earliest Chandragupta Maurya, but probably Ashoka. It's Ashokan Brahmi. Then it traveled down south and gave the Sinhala Brahmi to Sri Lanka, to the Sri Lankans. Made a detour to the land of the Tamils, and this is how it evolved. But then now some people claim that it's that chronology is all wrong. It goes back to the 7th century.
6th century, because Ashoka Brahmi is 3rd century BC.
Yeah. So how
But
do
we have now evidence.
sense to me? How do you fit this in?
Sometimes these dates also create problems.
Yeah.
Why? In most cases, dates help us to resolve a problem. But here, there is a possibility that Brahmi was introduced into different parts of South India at different times. When it comes to Mauryan Ashokan times, there was a well-defined geography. So minor rock edicts were defining the southern boundary that we have in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka and further north. But south of this particular, transect where we have Mauryan edicts, minor rock edicts, we don't have expansion of Mauryan influence. The Chera, Chora, Pandya kingdoms were there. Perhaps they also had adapted the Ashokan Maurya Brahmi script much earlier than its introduction into other parts of peninsular South India. There is a possibility.
Actually,
Because the dates are absolute dates. They are not just dates based on some kind of relative estimation and things like that. Sri Lankan material is even older, 5th century BC from Anuradhapura and so on. So there is this problem. We may find a solution gradually.
in short, there are several questions which need to be explored further. And this is the Brahmi script and the Harappan script, and at least where we do not have enough evidence, but areas where we have evidence but we not still explored belongs to the last millennium, but, from the Bhakti period, which emerged everywhere in India over a few centuries. We still not done enough of digging, enough archaeology there to figure out why the idea of God was questioned, why the idea of caste was questioned, and why the idea of gender was questioned in those centuries. I mean, we know that this happened, but we do not know precisely what was the impetus.
Not yet. There will be scope. A little. If you're a bit patient, you can certainly do it in 5 minutes.
So we have description of the Bhakti period. We do not have a good causal analysis of what happened in those times, because our history as it is written so far is about the dynasties, kingdoms of those times, and not about the precise labor relations, social relations, and so on. That we done in plenty for the colonial times, and maybe a couple of centuries prior to colonial times when it comes to Kerala and so on. But we still need to do a lot, and it is in that open-endedness of history in India theories are being put forward, and contentious theories, but politically perverse theories also about history are being put forward. And so many Indians are being killed in the name of history today.
So now let's move on to the modern period, because there's so much in this book. There's 7 sections. You can't possibly do justice to even one full section here. Let's the freedom struggle, the contribution of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who probably stands taller today than he did in his lifetime because of the ideas of his last speech in the Constituent Assembly and so on. So
And we depicted, sorry,
it's there. Yeah.
yeah, we covered the freedom struggle by focusing on the clash of ideas, European ideas and Indian ideas. But by clash, we do not mean conflict, but it's collaboration and conflict together. That is one thing we have. Then we also described how the idea of independence emerged.
Yes.
And that is because we not said how the idea of nationalism emerged. We not done that. The idea of independence emerged. We're not focusing on India as a nation. We're focusing on histories of India
As a
and
people.
the people. And therefore we given people's movements of Adivasis, impact of the British policy, colonial policies on forest and forest dwellers, and so on. But when we come to Ambedkar, we thought we must have a chapter on a hyphen, Gandhi hyphen Ambedkar.
Yes.
One without the other is incomplete picture of India. And Ambedkar stands very top, absolutely no doubt about it, because he brought a modern nation into being through the constitution. But he challenged a very ancient question, age-old question of caste, and that I think is a major task at hand for our people. Our people did not want caste. Caste had come among us, and Ambedkar was trying to, in a way, cleanse us. Ambedkar was the greatest catharsis India has seen, and that will remain there. Patel united Indian states. If I mean that's the popular description, but Ambedkar made us, and of course Periyar here, made us aware of our march to modernity is through this difficult path of clearing away caste. So we put Gandhi and Ambedkar together, and we're trying to show that they're not one against the other, as is the discussion, as is the discourse today, I mean, in the country. But both of them made us who we are.
On the Archaeological Survey of India, there's a comment, I think, for you, that it hasn't been able to really fulfill its mandate. It basically tries only to do conservation. But I would also add that there are instances it has come under pressure from the same ideology that you address here, including the rewriting of distortion of history and archaeology, starting with B.B. Lal. And right now it's going on. So this great institution has, what do you say, declined?
Well, it is declining together with other institutions. Is what has happened to.
1 minute.
But the British did create these surveys, which was a very useful thing for us to know. Linguistic survey just did not take off. After Grierson, there is no linguistic survey. the archaeological survey continued. The trouble is, we have so much of heritage. How much would archaeology do? Still, the universities contributed a lot. And now the government has found archaeological survey as a tool, a weapon to use for the help of propaganda. And so when every mosque is unearthed, the archaeological survey will find a temple under it. That's something very disturbing. Unfortunately, the funding for archaeological work
Has
is
declined.
given only by governments. There is no private, there is no non-governmental funding for archaeological work, and it requires sustained work. It cannot happen like a poem is written or a play is written. It cannot happen like that. So many permissions are necessary for. So the legal frameworks funding make archaeologists inclined towards towing the line rather than resisting. And there are very few among archaeologists who have the courage, like Dr. Kori said, who showed the courage. He said, okay, I'll become part of this book, fully knowing fully well that he may have to sacrifice some of his own interest in the process.
The contribution that state archaeology departments can make, it must be uneven, but Tamil Nadu is doing
It's
quite a lot.
wonderful. In fact,
They need more funding.
I wanted to say if I have a next birth, I should be born in Tamil Nadu and become an archaeologist. That much of patronage is very great here. I really appreciate the state patronage to archaeological research.
Yeah, I think they're quite keenly interested.
Yeah.
The only
State
caution should be don't go for antiquity frenzy. There was
yes, there's a lot of enthusiasm that is giving rise to these issues.
yeah.
Which have to be
There was a website called Antiquity Frenzy. You invent an antiquity older than it is. And there is a temptation for virtually everybody. Right?
Yeah.
And only academic, only scholarship can counter that. So, on that note, is there any other? I think we can conclude. Please buy this book, read this book. There's a lot in it. The time scale is huge. The range of topics is staggering. I think they've done a fantastic job in bringing this out in a very relatively short period of time, involving close to 100 contributors, and all without government subsidies, right?
No funding, no financial
funding.
help. We did
Already
it on
fine.
our own.
So, a continuation of his earlier work. So, I think we owe it to our two distinguished creative scholars, writers, to give them a big hand. And I'll start. You agree? Yeah.
And no, both of us would like to thank Mr. Ram, the library, the director of the library,
Yeah.
and Mr. Panirselvan who made it possible to meet
You
here.
wanted a-
Thank you so much indeed. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, all of you, for finding time to come and listen to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.